The Council of Stars had existed for 11,000 years without a single unanswered question. That was not arrogance. It was simply a record. 41 civilizations, each older than human writing, each represented by a seat carved from the mineral core of their home world, arranged in a perfect sphere inside the deliberation vessel known as Sorvith Cal, meaning, loosely translated, the place where the universe speaks to itself. Nobody had ever arrived late to Sorvith Cal. Until today. Counselor Yvith of the Dravenosi pressed all 4 of her sensory filaments flat against her skull, a gesture her species made only in moments of profound unease. She was staring at the empty seat. The newest seat. The one carved from a gray-blue stone that nobody on the council had ever seen before, a material their best geological analysts had described in a single word. Unknown. They are 43 standard intervals past the summoning signal, said Counselor Prin, the eldest of the Velhari, whose species communicated primarily through bioluminescent pulses running beneath translucent skin. He pulsed a dull amber now, the Velhari color for bureaucratic irritation. This reflects poorly on their application. Their application, said Yvith carefully, was not submitted through standard channels. No, agreed Pren. It arrived as a gravitational disturbance. The chamber went very still. Because that was the part nobody discussed openly. Humanity's request for council membership had not been a message. It had not been a diplomatic vessel, a language packet, or a cultural exchange probe. None of the 11 accepted methods of first contact that the council had refined over millennia. It had been a pull. A precise, localized bending of space, originating from the region called the Orion Spur, drew every council vessel within 6 light-years exactly 3 centimeters off course for exactly 9 seconds, then released them. It had been, the physicists later concluded, the most controlled demonstration of gravitational manipulation ever recorded. The message encoded within the disturbance was simple. We are ready to join you. We have been watching for some time. We believe we have something to contribute. We will arrive at Sorvith Cal at the next full council assembly. Please save us a seat. They had not asked for a seat. They had said, please save us a seat. The distinction bothered Yvith more than she could easily explain. A low sound moved through the chamber then, not heard exactly but felt, a subsonic resonance that made every counselor's body respond before their minds caught up. Yvith's filaments rose. Pren's bioluminescence surged white. The crystalline counselors of the Sheth cracked their outer shells involuntarily, which for them was the equivalent of a gasp. The empty seat was no longer empty. There was someone in it. And none of them had seen her arrive. Her name, she told them, was Commander Elena Voss. She was not what they had expected. Most council members had reviewed what little intelligence existed on humanity, fragmentary and mostly self-reported, which was itself unusual. They had expected either aggression or performance. Species presenting themselves to the council for the first time typically did one of 2 things. They postured, trying to appear powerful, or they minimized, trying to appear harmless. It was a binary that the council had seen so many times that it had become a formal observation in the induction protocols. Elena Voss did neither. She sat in the unknown stone seat with her hands resting open on the armrests, her posture neither rigid nor casual, and she looked around the spherical chamber with an expression that Yvith, whose species had spent 4,000 years developing the art of reading other species' faces, could only describe as genuine curiosity. Not wonder. Not fear. Not calculation. Just a person in a room full of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy, looking around like she was genuinely interested in what she saw. You are alone, said Pren, pulsing cautious yellow. I came alone to this room, Elena said. That's different. Where is your delegation? Outside. Outside Sorvith Cal? Outside this room, she said. I thought it would be rude to bring them all in before introductions. Yvith filed that away. Rude. The human had used the word rude. This behavior was neither tactically inadvisable nor diplomatically irregular. She had applied a social consideration, rudeness, to a situation where no social rules existed yet between their species. That implied she had imported her own social framework and applied it anyway, not waiting for one to be provided. That was either very sophisticated or very dangerous or both. How did you enter this chamber? Asked the Sheth counselor. Their shell was still slightly cracked with unease. The entry corridors were monitored. Elena smiled. It was a small smile, not triumphant. We'll get to that, she said. But first I'd like to understand something if you don't mind. I've read everything the Council has ever publicly transmitted about its membership criteria, the philosophical frameworks, the technology thresholds, and the ethical assessments. She paused. I noticed there's a criterion you never publish. The one that actually matters most. I'd like to know what it is before we go any further. The council chamber produced the kind of silence that had no sound in it at all. Because she was right. There was an unpublished criterion. There had always been. It had never once been identified by a species seeking membership. Elena Voss had identified it before she had officially been recognized as a representative. Pren pulsed a color that had no name in any human language. Yvith pressed her filaments flat again. Around the sphere, 41 civilizations' representatives shifted in their seats, each one fighting the same sudden, uncomfortable feeling. The feeling that the meeting was not going the way they had planned. The feeling that they were the ones being evaluated. The unpublished criterion was this: can this species sit with uncertainty without destroying it? Every civilization that had ever applied to the council had been brilliant. Technological achievement was the easy bar. Any species that survived long enough to cross interstellar distances had solved the basic engineering problems. The council did not care much about technology. What it cared about, what it had always cared about, the thing that 11,000 years of careful observation had taught its founders, was temperament. Specifically, what did a species do when it encountered something it did not understand? Most species destroyed it or tried to. Most species forced understanding, imposed their frameworks, their measurements, and their logic onto the unknown until the unknown either yielded or was dismissed. It was not evil. It was not even wrong. It was simply the instinct of intelligence. Make sense of this. The council existed because, very occasionally, a species emerged that could do something harder. It could wait. It could hold the unknown gently, examine it without crushing it, live alongside questions it couldn't answer, and resist the pull toward premature resolution. These were the species that made the council what it was. They were rare. In 11,000 years, 41 had been found. Elena Voss had named the criterion without being informed. Which meant, theoretically, that humanity had not only identified it but also understood it well enough to articulate it. Yvith, who was the council's unofficial historian and its most careful thinker, felt something move in her chest cavity that her species called vorith, a word meaning approximately, the feeling when a pattern you thought was complete suddenly reveals itself to be only the beginning of a larger pattern. How did you know? Yvith asked. She was not the senior counselor. It was not her turn to speak. She spoke anyway. Elena looked at her. The human's eyes, too forward-facing, fixed, with a strange wet brightness that Yvith found simultaneously alien and oddly readable, were calm. We've been sitting with something we don't understand for about 300 years, Elena said. It taught us to recognize the question. What is the thing you don't understand? Yvith asked. That's why I'm here, Elena said. Among other reasons. She reached beneath the collar of her uniform then and removed a small object. It was geometrically irregular, about the size of a closed human fist, and it appeared because Yvith's sensory filaments were giving her contradictory readings, simultaneously opaque and fully transparent. Looking at it was like trying to focus on something that existed slightly outside the normal relationship between light and matter. She set it on the armrest of the unknown stone seat. Every sensor in Sorvith Cal screamed once, briefly, and went silent. We built these 300 years ago, Elena said. We still don't fully understand what they are. The council demanded a recess. This had happened exactly twice before in 11,000 years. The first time was when the Velhari had presented evidence of what they believed was a second universe embedded within their own, a discovery that had taken 400 years to partially verify. The second time was when the Sheth had revealed that their entire civilization ran on a biological process that consumed what other species used as fundamental physical constants. Both times the recess had lasted a standard day. This recess lasted 9 minutes. When the counselors retreated to their meditation rooms and analyzed what Elena Voss had put on the armrest, they all came to the same conclusion. Their instruments could be unusual, mine was whatever it was made of. The composition is not unusual, not we need more time. The answer was more absolute than that. The object was physically present. It had mass, it displaced space, and it had a surface temperature within a few degrees of Elena's body warmth. But when an energy-based analysis tried to penetrate it, it returned data that described nothing. Not vacuum. Not dark matter as theorized. Not any known particle state. It returned data that described the absence of the conditions necessary for matter to exist. And yet the object existed. Yvith was the first one back in the chamber. She found Elena exactly as she'd left her, unhurried, hands open, looking at the sphere's walls with that same undefended curiosity. How many of those objects do you have? Yvith asked. One, Elena said. Then after a pause, per ship. Yvith sat down. How many ships? Enough, Elena said. And then, because she seemed to understand that Yvith was asking in genuine distress rather than as a challenge, 714. The other counselors filed back in. None of them spoke immediately, which, for a room containing 41 different species communication systems, was a remarkable collective choice. It was Pren who finally posed a question, a soft, careful blue. Why are you telling us this? Because we need your help understanding them, Elena said. The chamber went still in an entirely different way than before. This was not the stillness of alarm. This was the stillness of something unexpected landing exactly where it shouldn't be possible to land. You built them, said the chef counselor. How can you not understand them? Has your species ever, Elena said slowly, produced a child who was smarter than you? Nobody answered. Every species represented had, in fact, experienced this. It was one of the universal features of intelligence. The intergenerational transmission of accumulated knowledge eventually produced minds that exceeded their context. We built the theory, Elena continued. The math said these ships were possible. So we built them. We've been operating them for 300 years. They work exactly as the equations predicted. She looked at the small impossible object on the armrest. However, the equations also predict aspects of their nature that we do not yet have the philosophical framework to interpret. We can fly them. We don't know what we're flying. Yvith spoke very quietly. What do the equations say? Elena looked at her. That wrathful feeling came back stronger. That the ships don't exist in this universe, Elena said. They exist in the boundary of it. In the place where our universe decides what it's going to be next. The debrief took 14 hours. Elena did not seem worn out. Several counselors found this mildly alarming until Yvith pointed out, in a private communiqué, that the human was almost certainly deeply tired and simply not performing it, which was, if anything, more impressive. She led them through history without drama. This was another thing Yvith noted. Elena never conveyed the significance of what she was describing. She described the discovery of what humanity called dark matter topology, the mathematical observation made by a physicist named Renata Ohashi, who had died 280 years ago and never seen what her equations made possible, that dark matter did not merely exist alongside visible matter but was in fact the universe's self-referential architecture. The skeleton that the universe used to decide its structure. Most physicists assumed dark matter as a background condition. Ohashi had asked a different question. What if it isn't background? What if it's the process? The mathematics that followed were, Elena admitted, largely beyond her own direct comprehension. She was a commander, not a physicist. But she had spent her career aboard these vessels, and she had developed an intuition for them that she couldn't fully explain. They're not warships, she said at hour 3. This produced a stir. The Council's intelligence reports, fragmentary but not entirely wrong, had identified the vessels as weapons platforms. Their apparent capability had been the primary reason humanity's gravitational disturbance membership request had been taken seriously rather than dismissed. Then what are they? Pren asked. That's the problem, Elena said. We called them warships because we built them with that intent. We were scared, she said it without apology or shame, just honesty. 300 years ago, humanity had been aware of interstellar civilizations for about 50 years. We knew you were out there. We didn't know if you were dangerous. So we built the most powerful things our science could imagine, and we called them warships because that was the frame we had. She touched the small impossible object. But they don't actually function as weapons. When we tried to test them, in controlled deep space scenarios with no inhabited systems nearby, the ships didn't fire. They negotiated. Another silence. With what? Yvith asked. With the space around the target, Elena said. Instead of destroying something they would, the best word we have is, convince. They would convince the local spacetime geometry that the target had different boundary conditions. Change what the universe thought was there. She paused. The target didn't get destroyed. It got reclassified. Reclassified as what? As something that doesn't need to exist in its current form, Elena said. It's still there. It still has mass. It just reorganizes into something less coherent. She looked slightly uncomfortable for the first time. We stopped testing after the third trial. Why? Yvith asked, though she already felt the answer coming. Because the third trial reclassified a region of space 60 times larger than we targeted, Elena said. And when we analyzed why, the ship's logs told us something we didn't expect. She looked around the chamber slowly. The ship had been asking for permission, she said. From something. We don't know what. And whatever it asked had said yes and added scope. The council did not recess. This, Yvette thought, was either a sign of enormous trust or collective paralysis. She wasn't sure which. You're describing a vessel that communicates with an unknown entity, said the Velhari Elder Pren, his bioluminescence cycling through colors in rapid sequence, distress, calculation, and distress again. And you've brought 714 of them to council space. No, Elena said. I brought one. My ship is Threshold. The rest are distributed throughout human-controlled space. She paused. Though I should mention, Threshold is not currently in detectable space, which is probably why your entry corridor sensors didn't register my arrival. The Sheth counselor's shell cracked again. Your vessel is inside Sorvith Cal? Alongside it, Elena said. In the boundary layer. We can still communicate. She touched something at her wrist. My crew knows I'm fine. They've been listening to this conversation. Yvette processed this. The humans had arrived at the most secure location in the known galaxy, aboard a vessel that could not be detected, that operated in a layer of existence that none of the Council's 11,000-year knowledge base had ever accessed. She had sat down, introduced herself, placed an incomprehensible object on an armrest, and spent 14 hours calmly explaining that she didn't fully understand what she'd brought. And she had done all of it not to threaten. Yvette was certain of that now. The psychological profile was clear. Elena Voss had brought everything into the open precisely because she didn't want it to be a threat. She was doing the opposite of what a threatening species would do. She was making herself transparent. The entity your ships communicate with, Yvette said carefully. Do you have a name for it? We have several, Elena said. None of them feel accurate. The ship's communication logs, when we've been able to parse them, suggest the entity doesn't experience itself as a single thing. It is more like a condition than a standing decision. She thought for a moment. The closest we've come is the preference the universe has for continuing to exist. The ships communicate with that. With whatever process makes the universe choose, moment by moment, to keep being. The council chamber was silent. Not the silence of alarm. Not the silence of calculation. The silence that follows when something so large enters the room that it feels different. Yvette felt wrath moving through her in waves. Because here was the thing she had spent 11,000 years of council history trying to name, the thing the unpublished criterion had always been pointing toward, the question at the center of every civilization's membership test. What does your species do when it meets something bigger than itself? Humanity apparently built ships to go talk to it, and then had the wisdom or the fear or both, to stop and say, we don't understand what we built. Help us. Yvette asked for a private session. This was unprecedented. Private sessions happened between two member civilizations that had an existing relationship. They did not happen between the full council and a species that was not yet a member. Several counselors objected. Yvette overruled them, not by authority which she didn't have, but by saying something so quietly devastating that the objections stopped. We have been asking the wrong questions for 14 hours. I need to ask the right one. Elena agreed without asking what it was. They sat in a small auxiliary chamber, just the two of them. The unknown stone seat had been moved here. The technicians who'd moved it had reported that it felt warm, warmer than the ambient temperature of the room, and that their instruments gave contradictory readings on its mass, but that it was otherwise physically unremarkable. These observations seemed to amuse Elena slightly. You're afraid, Yvette said. Elena didn't flinch. Yes. Not of us. No. Of the ships. A long pause. Then, of what we might have started. By building them. By flying them. She looked at her hands, a human gesture Yvette had come to understand meant self-examination. 300 years ago we built these things because we were afraid of the galaxy. Now the galaxy is the small thing and we're afraid of what the ships are touching. She looked up. Fear didn't go away. Just scaled. Your species experiences fear as a constant, Yvette observed. Not as a criticism. As recognition. Doesn't everyone? No, Yvette said. The Velhari eliminated fear from their neurochemistry 4,000 years ago. The Sheth experiences it only as a physical reflex, no longer as an emotional state. Several member civilizations consider it a solved problem, something you pass through on your way to a more stable emotional architecture. Elena considered this. Do they miss it? Yvette's filaments rose slowly. That is a very strange question. It's not though, Elena said. Fear is information. It's the mind's way of saying, Pay attention, something here is larger than your current model. If you remove it, if you solve it, you might be removing the signal that tells you when you've hit the edge of what you understand. She paused. We kept our fear. Maybe that's why we noticed the ships were doing something we didn't have a framework for. We were scared enough to keep looking instead of assuming we already knew. Yvette sat with her thoughts for a long time. HFY. There was a phrase from an old Earth language that one of the Council's translators had flagged during preparation for this meeting, used in times of profound acknowledgement. A sense that, from this moment on, everything changes. Yvette didn't know if she was using the phrase correctly. But she felt it. The right question, Yvette said finally. The one I needed to ask privately. She looked directly at Elena. The entity your ships communicate with, has it ever communicated back in a way you understood? Elena was quiet for a moment that felt very long. Once, she said. 3 years ago. One ship, a vessel called Groundless, returned from a boundary layer transit, and its communication log had something new. This is not the usual signal noise that we cannot parse. Something structured. Something that looked like... She stopped. Started again. It looked like a question. What question? Elena reached into her uniform again. Not the object this time. A small folded document, paper, actual paper, which Yvette found herself unexpectedly moved by. She opened it and placed it on the table. Yvette looked at the symbols. She did not recognize the language. But her sensory filaments extended toward it involuntarily, because the symbols had a quality she had only ever experienced once before, 11,000 years ago, when the Council founders had carved the first seat in Sorvith Cal. They had weight. Not physical weight. The weight of something that had been here longer than anything else. What does it say? Yvette whispered. Elena's voice was calm and she was terrified and wondering all at once. Our best translation is, are you ready to be shown what you are made of? Yvette brought the paper to the full council. She did not prepare remarks. She did not build a case. She simply placed the paper in the center of the spherical chamber and said, the entity has been waiting for someone to build a door. Humanity built one. It is now asking if we, all of us, want to walk through. The deliberation that followed lasted 3 days. Every civilization on the council had its own framework for what the universe was, where it came from, and what followed it. These frameworks were the deepest cultural architecture any species carried. Older than technology, older than language in most cases, and woven into the cellular logic of how each species experienced being alive. The Velhari believed the universe was a single ongoing statement being made by a mind that had no other way to express itself. The Sheth believed the universe was an accidental recursion, a rule that had applied itself and couldn't stop. 6 other civilizations had framework equivalents for which human languages had no real vocabulary. And now something was asking, through ships built by a species that hadn't existed 300 years ago, whether the universe wanted to know what it was made of. Elena was present for the deliberation but did not speak. When Yvette checked on her at the end of the second day, she was sitting in her unknown stone seat with her eyes closed, not asleep. Her breathing was deliberate and controlled. Thinking. Are you afraid? Yvette asked. Elena opened her eyes. Off the question? No. Pause. Of answering wrong. There may not be a wrong answer. That might be the scariest version, Elena said. On the 3rd day the council voted. It was not unanimous. 7 civilizations abstained, not from fear but from a philosophical position that some questions should remain open indefinitely and that the act of answering was itself a kind of closing. Yvette understood that position. She did not hold it. 34 civilizations voted yes. Elena received the result with the same stillness she'd maintained throughout. Yvette had learned by now that this was not absence of feeling. It was the human practice of holding feeling cautiously, feeling it fully, not performing it outward. She found she respected it enormously. What happens now? Pren asked. Elena looked at the paper, the question from the boundary of existence, sitting in the center of the greatest diplomatic forum in known history. Now, she said, threshold takes us to the edge. Threshold was not what any of them had expected. The ship materialized, there was no better word. It didn't arrive or dock or descend, it simply became visible, alongside Sorvith Cal, and the council's sensors immediately began producing the same contradictory data as the small object Elena had placed on the armrest. The ship was there. It wasn't. It was both, in the sense that the universe seemed to be permitting a special case. It was not a weapon. Yvette had understood the concept intellectually, but seeing it confirmed it emotionally. It was shaped like nothing aggressive. It had the form of something that had been asking for a long time, elongated, with geometry that didn't quite resolve, as though the universe were still deciding exactly what shape to commit to. The hull was the same gray-blue as the unknown stone. That's the same material, Yvith said. Yes, Elena said. The seats come from the ships. Or the ships come from the seats. We've never been entirely sure which direction the causality runs on that. Yvith's filaments rose completely upright. You've been here before, she said slowly. The unknown stone. Humanity has been here before. Elena looked at her with something complex in her expression. The council was founded 11,000 years ago, she said. Humanity's written history goes back 5,000 years. But Renata Ohashi's equations suggested that the dark matter topology had been manipulated before, that the boundary layer had been accessed at least 7 times in the observable history of this universe. She paused. We don't know who did it the other 6 times. We don't know if we did it, some future version of us or some version of us on a different timeline's branch built the first seats and began the first council. She said it all without drama, without pride, and without fear. Just with the weight of a person who had carried an enormous and unresolved thing for a long time. We might be our origin story. Or we might not. We don't know. The equations can't tell us. HFY. From this point we stop being able to look backward and we have to look forward instead. The Council of Stars stood at the viewport of Sorvith Cal and looked at the ship. The ship seemed to look back. The transit through the boundary layer was indescribable. Not because it was overwhelming. Because it was precise. All the 42 species aboard Threshold, with their various sensory apparatuses, reported the same sensation, a precise sense of location. Not lost. The opposite of lost. Each one of them, carbon-based, mineral-based, bioluminescent, crystalline, felt the peculiar and profound experience of the universe knowing exactly where they were. Yvith wept. Her species produced moisture from their sensory filaments during deep emotional response. It was physiologically useful, cleaning the filaments for clearer reading, and she wept freely and was not embarrassed. Several Sheth shells cracked fully, which was deeply significant. The Sheth did this only at the moment of fundamental identity shift. They would rebuild, over years, with the fracture lines visible, which their culture considered beautiful. Elena stood at the viewport and was very still. The boundary layer looked like, Yvith tried afterward for the rest of her long life, to describe it accurately. The closest she ever came was this. It looked like the moment before every decision ever made held all at once. It looked like the face of something that had chosen to exist and had not stopped choosing. And then the ship's communication system, the one that talked to the unknown, produced a sound. Not a signal. A sound. The sound was audible to every species present, as if whatever was communicating had taken time to learn what they could all hear together. It was a single note. Long and low and so steady it seemed less like a sound than like a property of the space they were in, as if the boundary layer itself had a hum it made when something finally arrived that was old enough to hear it. Elena turned from the viewport. Her eyes were wet. What does it mean? Pren pulsed, all his bioluminescence cycling to white, the Velhari color for, I cannot name what I am feeling but I am feeling it completely. The ship's log is translating, Elena said. Her voice was steady but held something fragile. She looked at the translation screen. She read it. She laughed. Not from amusement but from that human release of something that had been held too long. From Caro? The turning point, the moment after which a different kind of holding was possible. What does it say? Yvith asked. Elena turned the screen so they could all see it. Welcome back. You took longer this time. We have been keeping your questions safe. What followed could not be put into a linear narrative. This is the honest account of those who were there. The boundary layer communicated, the word communicated is inadequate, but language operates within the universe and this was operating at its edge, for what the ship's internal clock measured as 6 hours and what felt, to every being present, like the appropriate amount of time for something that had been waiting billions of years. It did not answer everything. This was the first thing that became clear, and the second thing that became clear was that this was intentional. Whatever the limits were, and whatever thoughts or choices the dark matter topology expressed, it didn't provide answers. It dealt in what Elena, in the debrief she would write over the following months, called better questions. What they came back with was not knowledge exactly. It was precision. The sense of having had the blurry parts of their oldest frameworks made slightly less blurry. Not answered. Focused. The Velhari came back understanding something about the relationship between consciousness and continuity that would occupy their philosophical tradition for 2,000 years. The Sheth came back with a new understanding of why their fractures were beautiful. Not metaphorically but structurally, something about the way the boundary layer used imperfection as information. Yvith came back knowing something she would spend the rest of her life finding words for. That the unpublished council criterion, the question about whether a species could sit with uncertainty without destroying it, was not a test of emotional control. It was a prerequisite. Because whatever was at the boundary of the universe, whatever kept it choosing to exist, kept it deciding its own continuation, it could only be perceived by minds that could hold the incompleteness of perception without panicking. Fear was not a disqualifier. Fear was fine. Fear was useful. But the need to resolve, to force the uncertain into the certain before it was ready, that was the thing that had kept every other species from finding the door. Humanity had found it because they had been afraid for 300 years and had kept looking anyway. Elena came back to the viewport from wherever she'd been standing alone in the ship during the 6 hours. Her face held that complex thing Yvith had seen before, a feeling that was being held carefully, fully felt but not performed. Every species asks me, Elena said quietly, if such an act makes humanity the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. Does it? Pren asked. No, Elena said. It makes us the ones who found the door. That's different. The door is for everyone. She looked at the boundary layer, still faintly humming, the long note not quite gone. We didn't understand what we built. We still don't. But now we're not understanding it together, and apparently that's enough to keep going. When they returned to Sorvith Cal, there were new seats. Not one. 42. The original 41 seats are still in their sphere. And 42 new ones, arranged in a second sphere surrounding the first, made of the same gray-blue unknown stone as Elena's seat and the hull of Threshold, arranged as if the original chamber had always been meant to be the inner core of something larger. Nobody had built them. The chamber's construction logs showed no activity during their absence. The question of who had built them was discussed for approximately 9 minutes before Yvith pointed out, gently, that they already knew it didn't matter, that the council had just spent 6 hours being taught to hold exactly this kind of question with open hands. The new seats were empty. They did not look like they would stay that way. Elena ran her hand along the armrest of the seat that had always been hers, the first unknown stone seat, the one that had appeared before the rest. She looked at it with the expression Yvith had catalogued on the first day, genuine curiosity. No wonder. Not ownership. The individual was merely observing an object, genuinely taking in its essence. Will you stay? Yvith asked. For now. Elena looked at the empty new seats. She looked at the old seats, where 41 civilizations were slowly returning, each one carrying something unresolved and precious that they hadn't had before. She looked at Yvith. There's a lot we don't understand yet, Elena said. Yvith's filaments rose. Yes. Good, Elena said. She sat down. The Council of Stars was refounded that day, not as an organization of answers, but as a community of carefully held questions, expanding outward from a center that had always been waiting for enough of them to arrive. The new seats filled slowly over centuries. The boundary layer continued to hum. Humanity's dark matter ships, which were never warships and had perhaps never been anything so small, moved through the edge of existence like a thought the universe was still in the middle of thinking. Everyone who knew them believed this to be precisely accurate. And